I'm going to be talking about automating our property tax assessment through District 360. This is a project that I inherited. I have no previous experience with Salesforce or with property tax assessments. My first steps here were to learn how to use Salesforce and to learn what our BID tax assessment was. Important to note here, just a couple of basics for each process. We have a semi-annual BID tax assessment, so it happens twice a year. And then we already had some existing data in Salesforce. So we have a property object, and then we also have a property assessment object. A property object, each building or lot in our, like each square suffix lot or SSL in our neighborhood has a property object in Salesforce. And then with every semi-annual assessment, there's an added assessment record to that property. So there's a finite number of property records, more or less, and then hopefully infinite number of assessment records. So the first thing really that I had to do was learn what the existing data supply was in Salesforce. So I had to acknowledge that there were records that were correct. And I didn't really touch those that much. That meant that all of the data in there was accurate. And then when we ran the report, the revenue that it calculated for us was also accurate. The known unknowns was the data that I knew was inaccurate. These were property records that there were two of, property records that just had incorrect square footage. These were easy fixes, ones that I could go in and just kind of change by myself. The unknown knowns, these got a little more complicated. These were, I would say, almost user error as I was learning these processes. I just mentioned some duplicative property records, but sometimes that is necessary. So if you picture a building that is on two SSLs, one of them may be a lot and the other may be a building. So it's important that they did have their own records, but I was just unaware because the property name was the same. So just working through nuances and systems like that to make sure that they were both represented. And then unknown unknowns. These were just general blind spots. As you'll see later in my presentation, I talk about our communication with our governing tax body, which is the Office of Tax and Revenue. We just didn't have like a system in place to understand changing SSLs in our neighborhood. And so I'll kind of talk about how that played a role here. So forget Salesforce for a second. These are just a few of the basic parts of our tax assessment. And without knowing these four pieces of information, we cannot deliver our tax assessment. So these are the four critical pieces of information for each property. The first category, so the first two, just indicate whether or not the building is included in our property tax assessment. So if the building is exempt, it is not active. So the property has to be standing and it has to be active. The second one is it cannot be under construction. So there has to have been a year passed since the construction was delivered. So these first two are basically just yes or no, is the building included in our assessment? The assessment rate for the buildings that are included, the buildings will be included as one of four classifications. It will be commercial, which is either office or multifamily, residential, which is condo owners, hotel, which we know what those are, and then lots, which are either parking lots or just buildings that are under 50,000 square feet. And then the fourth and final piece of information is the building size. So this is the multiplier for the assessment. This can take several units, occupied square footage, number of hotel units, depending on the building, that's how you measure it. So now we had to come up with a way to build Salesforce to represent those four pieces of information in order to calculate the assessment. This is an example of what it looks like. The larger screenshot is a picture of our property object, and the smaller is a property assessment object. They're linked. You can see the yellow triangles have the same SSL. This is for one of our properties. It's a multifamily property named Sonia. And I'm going to call out the four places on here where those four distinct pieces of data are. So it's active, it's not exempt. This is the date of completion. So it was over a year ago, January 2023. It's office or commercial. and you can see the building size down here. And then if you look where it says revenue calculation, you can see it automatically calculates based on those 4 factors. So this is a little about the process. We have to do some pre-work. Our Office of Tax and Revenue requires that we submit the tax assessment in a very specific format. So we do this manually or on Excel regardless. And we take that Excel, well, myself and our CFO is heavily involved. And then we can send that to District 360 and they upload it very magically because 2 days later, all the data is already input into the system for us. And then once the data is put in, we have a pre-built report as a template that we can run. You just have to toggle the filter for the exact tax cycle you're looking for. So we just did this again in September, and we just filtered to the first half of 2025. You download that report, it turns into an Excel, and then you're able to compare that Excel with the same Excel that we're ready to submit to the Office of Tax and Revenue. So this is the process that we had created for back in February for the first time we were doing this. And I know you're thinking it probably went perfectly. It didn't. So it was the first time. We knew that we were going to have to make some iterations. A lot of them were very easy. Like I was saying before, a lot of front end work, just changing square footage, changing tax categories, making sure the data was as clean as it can be. Once I boiled all of those down, there was still a discrepancy that showed that our Salesforce revenue was higher than our Office of Tax and Revenue revenue. I narrowed it down to this one specific SSL. It's a multifamily building, which is our highest revenue source. So what I thought was a Salesforce systems error was actually $33,000 of missed revenue. What had happened was you can see the SSL on the screen. That property or just the SSL in the back end of the Office of Tax and Revenue had changed. And you can see that where it says the property was ceased. We know that property, it is 33 N Street. So when I plugged that in, you can see that it had generated 4 new SSLs. And that's what we had to add to our tax rolls. That is what we didn't know we had to add to our tax rolls. This resulted in an immediate back tax and it prevented years of missed revenue. Fireworks, thank you. So this cross-checking allows for a 2-factor authentication. This makes sure that mistakes are caught as a matter of course, not as a matter of luck. When we do this manually on an Excel file, we are able to just kind of rely on the previous tax cycle's data. And now we actually use it as to enhance our credibility and make sure it's comprehensive. So you can look at my main takeaways here. I just want to really iterate here that I truly had no experience with either of these. So I know this sounds like a very big data, a very heavy data pull, and it is, and you have to commit to it, and it's an investment of time and effort, but it really has paid off tenfold now that we're able to just kind of automatically and passively run this report. And now we're able to spend all of our time focusing on high impact programming.